About time you've been pacing.
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. I know that you're all interested in this, and so it should be a good time. I don't think I need to introduce myself, but anyway.
Do it anyway.
Yeah, John Freeberg, okay. I've got here a device that'll make this happen, and there's 3 buttons, and I'm hoping that I can handle the 3 buttons, okay? If I can't, I've got my high-tech grandson right here. He'll be able to help me out. So, if I could ask you to keep it quiet, because we don't have, amplification down here, and it echoes like crazy. So, and then if we could hold questions till the end, we'd deeply appreciate it. So, here we go. The Traveling Lodge, 1859 to 2019. Only problem is we haven't been able to prove the 1859 up for a while. So we'll talk about that. 6 locations of Anoka Lodge. Actually 9 if you want to count. Why does this story need to be told? When I was LEO, I was asked often, where did the lodge used to meet? I could not give an answer that was truthful. In our current published history, we have a couple. Some mention is made of locations post-fire, after the big fire. Published records about post-fire locations are rather controversial. So what we do have in the histories that we have are incorrect, unfortunately. I figured that out when we were doing the 150th anniversary. That's when I was heading the committee that rewrote the history, and I looked at this and I said, this isn't right. So that's what kind of clued me in that we need to do something. No mention is made of the lodge history prior to the big fire. And to set records straight and uncover our early history, I did research to address these topics. Over a period of 2 years, I put in roughly 400 hours, something like that, maybe a little more. Studied pertinent newspapers from 1866 through 1939. You'll be happy to know that the Anoka County Union keeps original copies, so that's where I went. And searched endless archived records. In the beginning, a map of Anoka, 1869. So, this is an aerial view. Some of you may know we didn't have airplanes back then. So what happened was a group of artists would go around to towns and they would look at the landscape, draw pictures of it as though it were seen from the air. And then they would sell those. So that's how this comes about. This is really the only picture that we have of Anoka in 1869. Now, this building right here, let me orient to you. Here is Main Street running down there. Rum River. We have a bridge. We have some commercial development along the shores of the Rum River. And if you look real close, it's kind of hard to see, but in the background up there, right in there, there's a train. So the train line is in 1869. This little thing that I've circled here is called, or was called, Town Hall. And in early Anoka, and Anoka was started roughly in the 1855, 53 area, somewhere in there. This was the government headquarters. After a while, put in a building somewhere over here on the other side. I'm not too sure where that was. But, so this was the Anoka Town Hall. It used to be down over here. Here's Monroe Street coming towards the river. And it used to be there, but it got moved up to there. The reason it moved, I don't know, but clearly there was a shortage of buildings. So you didn't tear a building down, you moved it. Due to building costs, the entire building was moved to new location. This building could have been a meeting place for the early lodge. We were constituted in October of 1859. There were probably meetings prior to that, and this would have been the logical place. The church across the street used to meet in there, and a few other organizations. So, but we have no record that we actually met there. Notice that settlement, here's 4th Avenue. Again, here's Main Street, there's 4th Avenue. There's little settlement beyond 5th Avenue. 10 years later, holy cow, what happened? Again, the same sort of scenario. People went through, artists went through and made a projection of an aerial view. We now have more buildings along the river. There's a sluice gate here for logs. You can see the train a little better back there. Settlement now goes beyond 7th Avenue, way out to there. Hey, we're moving along. Now, this little map that just appeared, this is the area that was covered by the fire. And I have a newspaper article that we can look at afterwards that shows what's inside that map. But I'm calling that the fire map. A closer look. This is the heart of the commercial district of Anoka. This is called the Washburn Mill. This is sometimes referred to as the Washburn Block. It has a couple of other names. I walked into the Historical Society a little while ago and asked, do you know anything about the Ham Building? Nobody knew anything about the Ham Building. Well, this was known as the Ham Building for a while. But anyway, this is sort of the area that the fire covered. The fire seems to have started somewhere down in this area, and we must have had a south wind that day, so I'm heading north, and so that was the path that the fire took. Now, remember, I'm the guy that did the research, but the guy that made this thing work is Hans. Okay? Without Hans, this would be unintelligible. So let's take the fire map that was published and put that in there. And again, the maps were created by hand, not to scale. Fire map represents major economic activity, and most importantly, it shows only the properties that were destroyed. The fire map, this thing here, which appeared in the newspaper, which was obviously hand-drawn, all that you see on the fire map was wiped out. It doesn't show the things that survived. They'll be important. Close up with the fire map. Again, this appeared in the Anoka County Union September 19th, I think it was, 1884. And when the fire hit, all of this was destroyed. Right there was the newspaper publishing office. That's where the paper was printed. That was wiped out. The editor and owner of the Anoka County Union had a lot of friends, and the St. Paul Pioneer Press came in. They were the ones that put together the story of the fire. So in the newspaper article, they numbered these lots here and gave a description of what was on these lots, whether they were owned or rented, and the insurance that they were covered by, and the things that they weren't covered by. The numbers again show what buildings were lost. Of course, the county and the city knows where the lot lines were, even though the buildings might be gone. But again, this was all basically down to ashes. Now let me back up here for a second. In a little while, I'll tell you how we learned all this, but the first lodge met in this building. So here is First Avenue, here's the river over here, here's the Washburn complex and a few other big buildings in here. So we were in what's called, or what was called at the time, Sims Hardware. And Sims Hardware just happens to be an L-shaped building, and you got to remember that back at this time there were no such things as addresses. Post office didn't require you to have an address. That came later. So I can't tell you if this was on Main Street or on First Avenue, because it had an entrance in both places. But that's where we first met, building number 21. So, Sims Hardware, we moved in there October 1859, and we moved out in January 1869, so 10 years. Now, you got to remember, back in this time period, pictures were very hard to come by, very expensive. Right, Sarah?
Yes.
We have very few pictures of this period. So the fire map tells me that building number 20 was the G.T. Daniels Company. They made shoes and boots. This is Sims Hardware. That's all we've got. Nothing else. We just happen to be kind of poaching on their picture.
Is that Lemmy in the window?
But as you can tell, the building is not what you would call fireproof. Nor is this one. It looks like this building over here may have kind of a brick front. But wood frame structures were the norm. So, lodge number 1, 10 years, the only picture we have. Lodge number 2. Site number 56, Worshipful Brother Tickner's brick building, January 1869 to January 1875. There it is, right there. So this is a picture that the Historical Society has. That's probably the most common picture you get asked for.
Yep.
Yep, that's, so we are looking down this way is the river, and we come up this way, we will come up to somewhere right about in here in the picture, 3rd Avenue, and this is Main Street. As you can see, it hadn't been covered with dirt or with tar yet. You don't see any cars here. But anyway, here is Worshipful Brother Heman Tickner's brick building. Why is that important? Here's an artist drawing of it. I'll read this to you. H.L. Tickner, Esquire, will move the building he now occupies as a drugstore to the corner lot opposite this office. So I think what he's talking about is the editor is saying, here's this office, that's my office. We think we moved that building over to here. So it was a wooden drugstore that used to be here. They picked that up, moved it over here. So, to the corner lot opposite this office, and on the old site, he will erect a splendid 2-story brick building, which will be the first one of brick ever erected in this town. Hey, we're moving. So this article was July of 1867. In somewhere late 1868, the newspaper shows this. The Freemasons of this town have removed to their new location hall in Tickner and Company's brick building. And hereafter, the meeting of this flourishing lodge will be held there. This hall is the finest one in town, and we are happy that this lodge is so prosperous as to demand such a splendid one. Hey! So, Worshipful Brother Tickner's picture is hanging up over there, but this was the first brick building in Anoka. We met upstairs, and we met there for almost 10 years.
That building's still there, John?
No! We'll have a look at what we can surmise on that, okay? 3rd location. Well, we moved into what we believe was Worshipful Brother Tickner's old building, which used to be a drugstore. And so it's now called Peter's Drugstore. We were there from January 1875 to August 1876, so roughly a year and a half. So this is 1st Avenue, Jackson Street. Location number 4. Hall over Bean and Guderian store. We were there from August 1876 to August of 1884. Fire. That's where we were when the fire hit. I've cut out a couple of ads that were in the paper. Bean and Guderian, dealers in hardware, stoves, tinware, builder's material, window glass, etc., tin, copper, sheet iron. Ironware. We are all kinds made to order on short notice. All stock will be sold at reduced prices. Now here's the problem with trying to track down where we were. Bean and Guderian's was located on Main Street, south side. Okay? Again, no such thing as street numbers. Didn't exist. So it was really hard to put into my mind where these places were, because I kept seeing these ads, Main Street, south side, couldn't figure out exactly what that was telling me. So we are waiting for the key, so to speak. So this is, let me back up here a minute, okay. So Bean and Guderian's. Here's the front view of, it later changed to MV Bean Hardware. So we're upstairs from this building. Again, this is where we were when the fire happened. It just so happens that my second grade teacher was Louise Bean, a relative of Martin Bean. So, the fire happens. Holy cow. What are we going to do? All of this, all this commercial activity, gone. And I'm telling you, at this time, there's about roughly 24 fraternal organizations meeting in Anoka. They all need to have some kind of a place to meet. So by this time, by 1884, there's a fair number of these buildings that have turned their upstairs into some kind of meeting hall. But they're now gone. So we have to find a place to meet. Over here, you'll notice there's no numbered squares, but there are some buildings in here. We decide to meet on the upper level of Chase's Grocery, which the newspaper refers to as Chase's Hall. So I call this location 4.5 because this is a temporary location. Now, I can't figure out where Chase's Hall is. So I call one of the local historians, a guy named Bob Kirshner, and I say, Bob, where was Chase's Grocery? Where was Chase's Hall? And he says, oh, that was probably W.F. Chase Grocery Store on Jackson Street. And I said, oh, Chase's Grocery Store on Jackson Street. Well, my goodness. We met there from September to November of 1884, right after the fire. This picture is probably early 1900s. Yeah, it's done with a good camera. It's done with good film. It's done in daylight. Things show up. Hey, this is a really good picture. We didn't get too many of these, do we, Sarah? No. So here is Chase's Lumber Company. You'll notice that it has an upstairs. There is a stairway in the back leading up to it. Next door, a very similar building, probably built by the same builder. This is called the White Hat Shop. There's an entry door here that goes up, so this was part commercial. They were selling ladies' hats down here, and the owner and operator lived upstairs. So I recently picked this up from Sarah. She probably wonders why. But before this was Chase Lumber Company, it was, and it's a little hard to read here, this is an earlier picture now, cameras weren't so good, but this says W.F. Chase Grocery. And it's located right there. It didn't get burned in the fire. It looked like it could have, but it didn't. So, it just so happens that I have this picture of W.F. Chase in my family records. And my grandson will now say, of course we do.
We always have pictures.
Why do I have this picture in my family records? Well, lo and behold. In 1933, my grandfather and his brother bought that building and started Freeburg Brothers Well, it's chicken feed, hay, cement, sand, the basics, okay? So it's at 227 Jackson Street. If you go over to Jackson Street now, the Courtside Bar has the address of 227 Jackson Street. I think that the store was slightly actually to the left of where the Courtside Bar is. I think the store was sitting where the parking lot is right now. Anyway, so my grandfather and his brother moved in 1933. The brother didn't last very long, and my dad came along, and so they converted this, they changed the name to Freeburg Fuel. Right down here is one of my dad's sisters. She has 3 male admirers around her. She didn't pick any one of those. She picked Jim Winterland, who became a well-known clothier in Anoka, and we have his picture up here on the wall. He was master of this lodge twice. Anyway, I come along, and in the early 1950s, we lived 2 blocks from this location. So all I had to do was just walk over here and pester everybody that was here, and I pestered all the people who had businesses downtown. They all knew who I was. So one day, I walk up the back stairs here, and I look into this room that's up here, and it's dust, the windows are dirty and dusty, and I can look in, and I can see that it's full of band instruments. And I'm saying to myself, what are these band instruments doing? So I'm 8 years old. So I walk downstairs and I ask my dad, Dad, why are all these band instruments up here? And he said to me, I'll paraphrase it, they used to belong to a band that no longer exists. Oh, okay. So, remember band instruments. It'll come up again. But this is where we met right after the fire, because this building survived the fire. And in October of 1884, we held a 3rd degree up here. So I, unknowingly, was looking into, from the back here, into a building that we had met in 1884 right after the fire and held a 3rd degree. So I'm probably the only one that can say that I've seen this kind of a situation. So remember, there's 24 other fraternal organizations that are looking for places to meet. So we had a location 4.6. So here's 4.5 Chases. Here's 4.6 Merchants Hotel. The newspaper had a lot of stories about organizations meeting in Merchants Hotel because it had a dining room, and so it was a pretty popular place. Also, right in here, right at the corner of 2nd and Main, this was Gage's Hall. And we held a number of festivals, installations, various dinners in this Gage's Hall, which was, again, I'm sure it was upstairs. So you can see our 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th location, we are all easy walking distance to Gage's Hall where we can have a big party. Here's a picture of Merchants Hotel, one of the few pictures we have, right, Sarah?
Right.
Again, we don't have paved streets. We have maybe possibly a wooden sidewalk. Obviously, the place is well attended to, and of course, there's no automobiles yet. So you get the picture here of what's going on, where we've been up to and right after the fire. Now, as we were meeting over Bean and Guderian's at location 4, we were laying plans, and this comes out of the paper, August 7th, 1884. The Masons, Knights of Pythias, that's one of the many organizations that we had in town, and the Oddfellows have leased the hall over the First National Bank and Putnam, Chesley, and Lindsay, because Sims Hardware has now been purchased by Putnam, Chesley, and Lindsay. So Sims or Putnam and Chesley is this part of this drawing and this part of this drawing, and the new bank was put in here. The bank, of course, was made of brick, okay? Building for 5 years at an annual rental of $200. The hall is being finished off, and as soon as completed will be occupied by the above lodges. So again, that was August 7th, 1884. What could have been? Lodge was scheduled to move to the new First National Bank building 9 days before the fire. It wouldn't have helped us anyway, because that went too. We continue to share space with Knights of Pythias and the Oddfellows. First National Bank is completely destroyed by fire. It didn't have a chance to really open. So here's kind of a summary of the fire damage. This is the headline in the newspaper: fire swept in at night, August 21st, 1884. This is the date that this is published. Total number of buildings destroyed, 86. Loss of buildings, 341,000. Loss of contents, 277K. Insurance coverage, 191K. Coverage on contents, 125. Total losses, 629,000. Covered by insurance, 316,000. Non-covered, 313,000. In today's money, roughly $7.5 million. Okay? The Anoka County Union burned to the ground. This was written and published with the help from Granville Pease. Granville Pease was the editor and owner of the Anoka County Union at the time. His friends at the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Now, notice here, from August the 17th, doesn't show it on here, but it shows that the what's called the Pease newspaper, the Anoka County Union, was in the part of the fire block that was destroyed. So in this newspaper article that I have, again, it shows by number what each one of those lots was about. So lot 54 was a 2-story brick, owner Bean and Guderian, loss $6,000, insurance coverage $1,500. Well prepared. Occupants Bean and Guderian hardware. Loss in the hardware part $8,000, insurance $1,000, so they lost $7,000 there. And the Order of Masons, Oddfellows, Knights of Pythias, loss $1,000, insurance $100. So, under insurance was pretty much the story of the day. this is the day after, or perhaps 2 days after. Here is 2nd Avenue. Here's Main Street. This was the Anoka National Bank. Here was the new First National Bank. Okay? And where these ladies are standing, this is the corner of 2nd and Main. So the lodge building would have been just to the left outside of this picture, and these ladies are standing in the hole that was once the foundation for the wooden building that was there. Now, at the time of the fire, we had a brother who was the fire chief, and that was Oscar Cutter, who was master of this lodge 5 times. So Oscar, because he's the fire chief, he can go in and look at all these buildings. So where does he go? He goes down to where the lodge used to be, and he's digging around. This is what he pulled out. This is the top of the senior deacon's rod. It looks the same today as it did back then. The one we have now is, of course, nice nickel plated. The nickel plating that was probably on this one is gone. One of the tips of the compass is broken off. But again, I am speculating here, but I received this from my brother-in-law, Mark Cutter, who was a distant relative of Oscar Cutter's. When the Cutter house was being abandoned out here on where Cutter's Grove is, Mrs. Cutter had died, and so the estate was being taken care of. My brother-in-law was taking stuff out of one of the barns. He picks up a box and he says, "Hey John, here's some Masonic stuff. Why don't you take this?" And so in there was this. And I looked at this for a long time, trying to understand. It was obviously Oscar's. He was a wealthy man. Why would he have this very destroyed ornament? Well, the only reason that came to mind was he pulled it out of the ashes of the old lodge. So this is the only remnant that we have left of the old lodge. And we keep this in our display case over there, right next to Oscar's picture. So, pretty bleak. The newspaper talked about, okay, we need to rebuild. Everybody decided pretty quickly, we need to rebuild the town. Are we going to do it cheap with wood, or are we going to do it the right way and put up brick buildings? We did it the right way, put up brick buildings, and that's why we still have a downtown today. So here's Oscar Cutter in his fire chief's uniform. Oscar, an integral contributor to weaving Anoka's fabric. This man had his name in the newspaper at least 3 times a week. He was a member of multiple organizations. I don't know when this man slept. He was county auditor, fire chief, he was an insurance agent, he was a census enumerator, and he ran for state auditor. His house used to sit right down here where the old post office building is right now. Big, huge place. Retrieved after the fire, the only artifact from the original lodge. Was worshipful master of the lodge 4 times before the fire and 1 time after the fire. Prominent member of at least 6 other fraternities in capacity of leadership or conductance of rituals. This man was a good speaker. Now, remember, the fire was middle of September 1884. We lost everything, especially our minutes books. So immediately after the fire, we ordered some new supplies, we got a new minutes book, and so we now have the minutes books from end of September 1884 until 2 days ago, okay? So we finally, here in December of 1884, we move into what's now called the Norrell block. And you can't see it, but this header up here says G. Norrell, N-O-R-E-L-L. Now, that was Gustav Norrell, and I don't know his exact relationship, but Olaf Norrell was apparently the guy who was really running the operation. Olaf was his brother, and they put together this building. And this building I've seen referred to as the Norrell Block, Center Block, Washburn Building, and Ham Building. And one day I walk into the Historical Society and I ask, do you have information on the Ham Building? And people are looking at me like, what? The Ham Building? Never heard of the Ham Building. No, no information on the Ham Building. Okay. Center Block was entirely destroyed in the fire of August 1884. It was completely rebuilt for occupancy on December 30th, 1884. These people were serious. Okay, that was ashes 2.5 months ago, 3.5 months ago. Ashes, hole in the ground. By the end of December, it's up and running, and we move in. So I'm calling this location number 5. And we actually met over on the other side over there, but we'll get to that in a minute. But so this is location number 5. In 1916, or somewhere thereabouts, this is probably still needs a little more research on my part, but in 1916, according to an article in the newspaper, we moved within the same city block to the former Royal Arcanum. Royal Arcanum was another fraternal organization that met here at what is now 121 Main Street, right over here basically at the far end of this building. I don't know exactly why we moved. I mean, again, that needs a little more research, but in 1916, in 1912, Olaf Norrell, our landlord of 20 years, dies. He was a brother. In 1916, I think it was February, Doc Aldrich dies. The country is about to go to war, and the Royal Arch group has turned in its charter because it can no longer, it doesn't have enough men to open the lodge. So around this time, there was a lot of stress economically, and so we moved into the other end of the building because the Royal Arcanum, or the Knights of Pythias, had moved out from here, and they moved down here into the old Royal Arcanium Hall. So I think we moved over there because it was financially expedient. So, picture taken from the Washburn Mill, currently occupied by the City Hall. That's why the view that we're having looks the way it does, because we're on a real tall building looking out. And if I'm not mistaken, somewhere back in here, it's a little hard to see, but the Aldrich House is now there. In going through the records that they have at the Historical Society, I found this original document. It's a drawing of the layout of the lodge inside location number 5, Nora Block, December 1884, and we were there until January of 1916. So, here is an original drawing showing how the brothers were going to set up the lodge building inside here. Lodge acquired materials to finish off the lodge, work done by the brothers, drawing in the records of the Anoka County Historical Society. So they have the original of this. And so here it's a little hard to read, but property room for Blue Lodge, preparation room, anteroom, stairs going up. So Diaz in the east, Diaz in the west. This is the first indication we have of what the lodge was looking like. This was now a new modern building. We hadn't been in one this modern before. Street view of location number 5, Ham Building. What? I'm still trying to figure out this Ham Building, and I finally figure out that, oh, it's a Ham's beer place. Oh, that's why it's called the Ham Building. Eh? It's now McGillicuddy's Bar. It's been a whole lot of other things, but I believe that's where people got the name calling it the Ham Building. Again, my speculation. At our 75th anniversary celebration in 1934, Worshipful Brother Malin Babcock, who was a lawyer, stated that the history from the inception of the lodge is unknown. So in 1934, we admit we have no idea of what went on before this time. And probably before that, before 1934, we had no idea. Now, Malin, I've sat in lodge with him. He's a bright guy. He's a lawyer. He knows everybody. If it was known what the lodge locations were, he would have known. He said in the newspaper article, we have no idea. So, for sure, since 1934, we have had no idea of where the lodge used to meet. Nomenclature of buildings and locations are subject to period descriptions and do not follow current definitions. So that's why I could read there was articles in the newspaper that said that we moved from this hall to that hall, but again, there was no addresses. Sometimes they wouldn't tell you what street it was on. So there was a lot of confusion as to exactly where were we at. How did I know all this other stuff that I just told you? An example, 2016 First Avenue North, Anoka Min 55303 versus Center Block, Nora Block, Ham Building, or Washburn, currently known as McGillicuddy's Bar. So again, this location went under 4 different names in the newspaper. I took these pictures here not long ago. So this is the actual location. We were looking at it from this perspective over there. This is the actual location of where the lodge was in the second story of this building. Now remember, down here was the ham. It was called the Ham Building because there was a ham And I think it was a brewery, if I'm not mistaken. There's some reference to a brewery, a Ham's Brewery in town. Those of you who've been around for a while know that. Can anybody tell me what this used to be?
Hem Hem Parade.
Herr Schmitz?
Herr Schmidt. Okay? So, just like in Munich, they've got the Hofbrauhaus and the Lohenbrauhaus. Well, Anoka had the Ham House over here, and here we had the Schmidt House.
Careful there.
So, this is where we met until roughly 1916, and then we basically moved down the hall to location 5.5. So that's why, again, it was a temporary thing. I did get permission to go inside this building. Here's what the old lodge looks like now. And Denise, you'll be happy to know, you know Lillian's business now?
Yes.
Lillian's, yeah?
Yep.
This is her workshop. So that's what's going on in the old lodge, okay? Lillian's workshop. So, location 5.5. Again, I believe it was intended to be temporary. It was probably an economic necessity to make that move. So, from the newspaper, grand dedication, banquet and ball. The Masons, Knights of Pythias, and Oddfellows of Anoka have decided to give a grand banquet and ball on the opening of their new hall in Olofsnorrel block on the evening of December 30th, 1884. All members of the above orders are cordially invited to attend without further notice. Within 4 months, the lodge was able to regroup, hold meetings in a dedicated hall, and shared space with the Knights of Pythias and the Oddfellows, as we had done previous to the fire. So what is all this, how does this relate to today? Again, through Hans's miracle working, we have a guide to where it was and we were. Now remember, all of what you see here was just ashes right after the fire. So we start off at this location, and remember that was an L-shaped building. That's where our first Sims hardware store was. It's now there's nothing in there right now. I don't give this an address because it's not meaningful. By the way, I do have handouts. Spencer, could you get those handed out to people? If you want to take notes, you can do it, if you can read. So while Spencer's handing those out, here is location number 1. We move across the street to this building, which is now part of Jensen's department store. That's location number 2. We move over here to what was called Peter's Drugstore at the time. We call that location number 3. We move back across Main Street to another building now owned by Jensen's department store. That's location number 4. That's where we were when the fire hit. Love those flames, don't you? Thank Hans for that. Location number 4, we move to location 4.5, the Chase Hall. And again, my memory of this is, how could this be called a hall? Well, I mean, it looked like inside, it looked like a warming house at the skating rink. It was unfinished lumber, no paint. There were seats were nailed to the walls around the outside walls. I mean, that's what it was. So, location 4.5. We also, during this same period, right after the fire, met at what is now the corner of 2nd and Monroe, which is now, of course, occupied by the Walker Building. So, location 4.6. We move now to location number 5, Norrells Hall. We're there until roughly 1916, when we moved to location what I call 5.5, which is actually in somewhere up in here now. This, as some of you may recall, this was the First National Bank building at some point in time. Colburn Hilliard, the company that my uncle ran, Jim Winterland, he had his operation in here. In 1949, my mother and father and I stood at this corner and watched Uncle Jim's store burn. And so everything that used to be there, if there was a lodge there, I mean, I can remember walking up to this door a few days after the fire, I could see the sky. So everything that used to be there is no longer there. So the only thing that really resembles where we used to be, what we had at one time, was right in there. So from 5.5, we move over to location 6, where we are right now. So that's the progression. Now some of you may ask, how did we find this out? So here's the inside story. How did we discover this information? My sources, the Anoka County Historical Society. Hey, give a big hand for this. The Anoka County Union newspaper, again, as I refer to them as the ACU, they have original copies of the Anoka County Union back to 1866. They gave me permission. They gave me a small little office. I'd open up this big, huge bunch of newspapers in a binder and go through it page by page. Now remember, we're talking something like this, small print, and I would go down each column because I never knew where some significant piece of information was going to be. That's why I spent something in the area of 400 hours going through newspaper line by line. Found out a lot of other things that I didn't know. Whoops. There was also another newspaper in town, the Anoka County Herald. That was run by another brother. So I got some information from them. They had probably less good news, but better pictures. The Anoka County Register of Deeds and Death Certificates, had to look up a few things there. My own family archives and the Cutter family archives. Lodge records, because we've got them now post-fire, and local historians. So I had to call on a lot of people for this. Again, here's a picture of the period. This fellow here is unknown, but it's not really Napoleon, but he looks like Napoleon. This over here didn't come out too good, but this is Granville Pease, the guy who was the owner and editor of the Anoka County Union from its inception up until the 1920s. Anoka, at the junction of the Mississippi and Rum River, is a major commercial hub. Lumber milling, flour milling, county seat. Owner, editor of the Anoka County Union, that's this guy right here. He's an immigrant from the East Coast, as many of our early brothers were. A staunch Republican, a dedicated Baptist, and pro-temperance. Everybody knows what pro-temperance means? He didn't take a drink. And he didn't want you to either, okay? So the pro-temperance movement's got a lot of ink in his paper. He was highly recognized as an authority in the newspaper business. When he died, his obituary listed the people who were there. Amongst them was like 1 or 2 former governors. So he was a well-known man. The character of Granville Pease, favorably inclined towards fraternal organizations, and there were approximately 24 of them pre-fire. If it hadn't have been for him being what I would call favorable towards fraternal organizations, we might not have gotten the ink in the paper that we did, or in the other organizations either. So we owe a lot to this man. Extensively and factually captured Anoka's expansion, lost his whole business in the fire. He had amazing control and use of the English language and stood for his principles. Now here's a little editorial that he put in. I'll read this to you. This will give you an idea of the mindset of Granville Pease. This is the editor. Now, I thought we were going to have somebody from the newspaper here today, but here is an editorial. Locals, he's talking to the citizens, locals. A great many people think a newspaper should have a full page of local news, whether anything happens or not, period. Deluded mortals. In 2 words, he says, you guys out there are mortal and delusional. I am immortal and not delusional. Okay? That's how he uses words. Local editors cannot make people commit suicide or break their necks, run away with their neighbors' wives, or do any of the other exciting things which go in to make up the material out of which the local reporter delights to weave paragraphs. Furnishing domestic news when there is none is very much like extracting blood from a turnip. It is no more than fair that those people who grumble at the lack of local news in their paper should stop and think whether they could not give the editor an item or 2 worth printing, so as to let them hold their peace or growl at their own reminiscence. Now, we wouldn't see anything like this from the editors of the Anoka County Union today. Okay? Wouldn't happen. And this was mild compared to when he wrote our editorials about the people who didn't pay for their subscriptions. He was really fierce about that. We won't get into that. So here he is. This is a picture of Granville Pease, a distinguished gentleman. Here is his son, Thomas Pease. Thomas took over after his dad retired. T.J. Pease, that's the son, continued his father's diligent reporting, as did his son Archie. So here's grandfather, here's son, and not shown, but they had, the grandson was Archie. Thomas and Archie were both brothers in this lodge. Both members of Anoka Lodge. They reported on Anoka Lodge activities beyond what was captured in the minutes. Unfortunately, the lodge's minutes were lost prior to 1884, so these people are the source for what we know. Granville and T.J. Pease were essential in recreating Lodge and Anoka history. They created Anoka's Facebook in the 19th and 20th century. Again, at the time, you have to understand this, that this newspaper was the prime source of news for everybody in this area. That includes local, regional, state, nation, and world. It was all wrapped into one. And also, there was Facebook. It was called the Personals column. Some people call it the Gossip column. So, there would be little one-liners. Mrs. Johnson went to Minneapolis Sunday for shopping. Mr. Johnson is painting his house. I mean, this was the Facebook of the day. Came out once a week. People would open it to the personals first thing before they'd read the news. What's going on? And there was little hints in there once in a while about what was pertinent to the lodge. So I had to go through every one of these to figure out which one was important. Now, I happen to live 1 block from what was called the Pease Printery, which was down at the bottom of Harrison Street, right where Harrison Street runs into the Rum River. And this is where the reporters were, this is where the paper was printed. It's a brick building. I think they're going to get ready to turn it into it's a restaurant that's coming in there pretty soon.
Event center.
Ben Center? Okay.
Event.
Okay. So anyway, it's going to be repurposed. So I lived roughly 1 block from that building. Whoop. So as I told you, I went down to see my dad's store quite often. I would go down to the Pease Printery. There was a side door I would walk into, and he'd walk into this building, and here's this great big enormous press pushing out newspaper. And it had belts and pulleys and motors and gears and whatnot, and you could die instantly if you didn't watch what you were doing. Over here, there was a crucible full of molten lead where they made the type up to put the newspaper together. Can you imagine working inside a building with a crucible of molten lead 5 days a week? I mean, I don't know if anybody lived to tell about it. But anyway, I would go in there maybe by myself or with other kids, and we just kind of walked around the place, the molten lead and the gears and the motors, so what, And when we decided to leave, the people would hand us tablets that they'd made up out of scrap paper that they'd put together as tablets. Say, here, kid, have some of these. Things like that don't happen today. Now also, this gentleman, Thomas Pease, was my next door neighbor. We lived at 313 Harrison Street, which is about 1,100 feet due north of this spot, and Thomas lived at 315 Harrison Street. Now, when I was a kid, roughly 8 years old or so, Thomas was elderly. Okay, he looks quite young here. He was very elderly when I knew him, and I would see him out in the yard for a while, and all of a sudden I didn't see him anymore, and I asked my dad, where's Mr. Pease? And my dad said, he's entering his second childhood. So back then they had dementia, they had Alzheimer's, but they didn't use those words, didn't have those words. So, again, what's the source of all this information? How do I know that what I just told you is true? Here is the first record of Anoka Lodge occurring in the Anoka County Union. June 1867, so we had already been in existence for 8 years, retouched for readability. The Masonic Festival at the Anoka House. So there is, I've checked with the Historical Society, there's no picture of the Anoka House, but, and it was formerly called the New England House, because again, a lot of the people who came here were New Englanders. But we, on 1867, is said by, on Friday evening last, is said by those who were present to have been a pleasant affair. A special reunion and supper, singing, speeches, and dancing were the features of the occasion. So, back in 1867, we were tearing up the town. This is the first indication that we have that we were doing that. Announcement of a large Masonic festival outside of the meeting hall, and references this New England house, which again, we don't have any really more record of. Now, in 1867, again, we were trying to attract people to this town. And we got most of our folks from the East Coast. So the newspaper put together what I would call a Chamber of Commerce article. And they said, here's what you're going to get if you come to Anoka. Now up here it says we have a school board, and gives who the school board is, and down here it lists we have physicians. So the other things that you're going to find, public institutions, Masonic Lodge number 30, AF and AM Hall on Main Street in Tickner Company's brick building. You got to remember, you East Coasters, if you come out here to Minnesota, we actually have a brick building. We put it right here in the newspaper. Feel better. You can come here. It's safe. We also have a good Templars Lodge. Meets on Hall on Main Street, east of Bridge. That's definitive. So, you know, there was no Shriners in here, okay? We know that. Anoka Brass Band, James Miller leader. Remember I told you about all those brass instruments that were up on top of my dad's store? I think there's a connection between this brass band and those instruments. I can't prove it, but I think there's a connection. We got a library. Well, we got a library association. Don't look for a building, okay? We got a library association, and it's headed up by a guy, Reverend Packard. Hey, what the heck, you know? We got a fire company. You don't have to worry about burning up. Well. Yeah, that's a laugher. Anoka Musical Society. See? We have a post office. And we have a union school. So, come on over. Come on. Get out of that crowded west, that crowded east coast. Anoka's got everything you could want. Masonic Lodge is rated first in public institutions. Hey, good deal. Chamber of Commerce to entice immigrants to come over here, immigrants from the East Coast. Remember, Doc Ulrich and his wife came here from the East Coast. They said it was much nicer here. We have a Masonic Lodge and a brick building and a fire department and a post office. What more could you want? Holy cow, come on. Good Templars Lodge. Here is a paid advertisement that occurred in a newspaper that no longer exists, the Anoka County Press, February of 1870. So, Anoka Lodge number 30, AF and AM, regular communication at their hall and Tickner Company's brick building. Hey, but we don't want to sell this short. Saturday, every evening preceding the full moon of each month, members of the fraternity are respectfully invited to attend. So, locals, or if you're from out of town, come on over. If you're visiting, here we are. Again, the uneven quality of the printing. At this point in time, the art of printing a newspaper was not quite mastered. This appeared in the Anoka County Union, tracing the use of hall. Okay, so 1878. The annual meeting of Anoka Lodge number 30 will be held Saturday evening, December 7th, 1878, at their hall for the election of officers. Again, this is what made this whole thing. So where was the hall? Well, everybody in town knew where the hall was. didn't need any more description than that. No other mention of location other than hall. No street address or numbering provided. Everybody knew where the hall was supposed to be. Conventional way of announcing poses major challenges for research. So, I'm going through these newspapers, and lo and behold, the keystone evidence. Anoka County Union published January 1st, 1880, public installation of Anoka Lodge number 30 officers and North Star chapter number 7 of the Order of the Eastern Star in the Bean and Guderian store, location number 4. The prime source of confirming dates of lodge location and meetings prior to the fire. Source, Oscar Cutter. So what is happening here is the lodge and the OES here at the time says we're having a joint installation at our lodge. So it starts off by saying Anoka Lodge number 30, AFM, and meet at their hall over Bean and Guderian store last Friday evening for the purpose of publicly installing. So we are at Bean and Guderian's at 1880. Got it right here, and I got it from, whoop, sorry about that, and I got it from Oscar Cutter, a source I trust. Okay? And it's in a newspaper that has an editor that I trust. Down here, in the next paragraph, we blew this up. Accordingly, so it talks about Oscar starting up the meeting, and quoting here now, accordingly, he produced a roll of manuscripts and began, he's telling now the history of the lodge. The effort was brimful of happy conceptions and witty allusions, and those present were convulsed with laughter several times. The address contained much historical and statistical information regarding Anoka Lodge number 30, and the author has kindly permitted us to make the following extracts. So what this tells me is that Oscar is talking. He probably has prepared remarks, and there is a reporter from the newspaper in the audience who's gotten permission to quote the proceedings. So this looks good. This looks good. So, I've cut out a lot of the superfluous stuff here. This is a long article. On October 13th, following the another meeting was held, and the offices were, it talks about, we installed the office, the first officers, and we know who they were because the Grand Lodge has got those records. The key sentence is, the Committee on Hall reported they had leased the hall over Sims' store, now Putnam, Chesley, and Lindsay. We now have confirmation of where we first met. And this, of course, we met prior to the newspaper coming into publication. So the newspaper would have never carried that story. So if it hadn't been for Oscar telling us this information, we would have never known. Because this is the only reference there is. So Oscar has already told us he's meeting in location number 4. So, now, the crucial. The lodge occupied the hall where it first met until January 26, 1869, when the hall in Tickner Building was dedicated and occupied until January 1875, where it remained, where it removed to the hall over Peter's Drugstore, remaining there until August 1876. since which time it has occupied its present lodge room. So, in 3 sentences, we know exactly where it was that we started, where we had been, and where we are now. Again, from a trusted source. This is the only time this information was ever made available. And gives you a little idea of the character of Oscar Cutter. After Mr. Cutter had finished, all present were invited to repair to Gage's Hall, again a fairly common place to go. After arriving at this hall, a half a dozen or more tables loaded with the most everything the culinary could produce greeted the eye. In a moment, all were seated and doing ample justice to the sumptuous supper spread before them, kind of like we had tonight. While the filling of the inner man was in progress, it was announced that all food remaining would be distributed to the poor, and a committee was appointed to see that the wishes of the lodge were carried out in this particular. So that was the nature of what was going on in Anoka Lodge number 30 in 1880. In summary, we now have an accurate history of Anoka Lodge number 30 that previously did not exist. From its beginning, the lodge moved through 6 permanent and 3 temporary locations, faced major obstacles such as the fire, and yet prospered throughout 160 years. Through research discovered that approximately 20 successful and flourishing 19th century fraternal organizations existed, but only 4 have a presence today. During this research, discovered a plethora of historical information related to the city and county of Anoka that emerged and would not have otherwise been retrievable. And this is primarily, I pulled out articles that were related to other fraternal organizations. And the reason I did that was because they would oftentimes, at an installation, they would list the members, and wouldn't you know, the members were almost constant throughout. Everybody was a member of everything. Okay? Well, that's why I did it. Thanks to the many contributors, more specifically the historical societies and organizations that made this material available to me, and especially to my wife Sharon for enduring the invasion of her space in our basement. Sherry, please stand up. Stand up, Sherry. My family is here. My brother. Here's my brother. Mark, stand up. Stand up. Hey. My son Ragnar. Ragnar, stand up. And our cameraman, Spencer Freeberg. Questions? Lights? Question? Well, we got questions. Okay.
Who knows who the master was during the Great Fire?
You do.
I know.
Who was it?
Sparks.
Sparks.
Question.
Yes.
How well does all this information coincide with the listing of our locations at Grand Lodge?
Grand Lodge has no idea where we're at, because an annual report does not require your location. Okay.
It does now, but
It
it
does-
didn't back then.
Now it asks for an address, but back then, because I went through every report from 59 to 85,
Okay.
it never required where you were. Okay, that's why this information is so important in the newspaper.
Okay.
Okay?
Here's a job.
Yes.
You're a good researcher. How many times do you go over the same material, and once you've learned something, you read over the material again, and then you start pulling out some more stuff, Did you go through that kind of a process?
I did, because I'd gone through about 10 years, and I finally figured out that, oh, a lot of these things are starting to make sense to me. What did I miss before? So that's when I went back and reviewed the first 10 years, and I discovered some more things that were pertinent.
Okay, and
Yes.
another question, sidebar, it's more a coincidence that Oscar Cutter, was it his son or grandson that established the American Legion Lodge, or American Legion Post here?
Well, he didn't establish it, but it's named after him.
That's right.
And so they were of some relation. I can't remember now exactly what the relationship is, but yes, that Cutter is related to Oscar. All the Cutters are related to each other. And I, by the way, because my wife's sister is married to a Cutter, that's how I happen to have a Cutter for a brother-in-law. I was able to go through the Cutter family archives, and there's a lot of Oscar stuff in there, medals. I mean, the man was, if he put all his medals on, he couldn't stand up straight, okay? I was looking for the original document that he used to give that presentation. Couldn't find it. But I did look, okay? Sherry?
How did Oscar Cutter pass away?
How did Oscar Cutter pass away? Oscar died young at age 58. Okay? For a man who didn't sleep, that would probably be normal. Okay? But I asked the Cutter family several times, do you have an obituary for Oscar? No. No obituary for Oscar. Why don't you have an obituary for Oscar? Well, I don't know. I asked the Historical Society, do you have an obituary for Oscar Cutter? No. How could a man so famous not have an obituary somewhere? So I knew I was going to come to it in the newspaper, and so there it is. I knew when he died, so I'm looking for it. There it is. Oscar received 2 weeks worth of obituaries, column after column.
I would like to point out that we have those newspapers, and so actually do have that obituary. Don't make us.
You didn't have it in your printed file.
Well,
Yeah.
that means somebody didn't put it in that
Yeah,
file.
exactly.
We had the thing. Somebody just was lazy.
Yeah, but it was literally his obituary went on for 2 weeks. I photographed the whole thing and turned it into something reasonable. And now the Cutter family has the obituary for Oscar Cutter. Oscar Cutter, again, the man never stopped. Okay? So one Sunday, he's on a bicycle ride up to Elk River, and he's coming back. And about halfway back, the report says he just keels over dead. Falls off the bike, gone, heart attack. Age 58. Okay. Another interesting fact here is, now you got to remember that back in the 1800s, most of the fraternal organizations that were in town, including us, existed because they offered group life insurance. Believe it or not. Okay? Like Lutheran Brotherhood today. Okay? So, there was several companies who were selling Masonic insurance. Oscar was an insurance agent. Okay? About 6 months after his passing, there was a little tiny article at the edge of the newspaper. And Oscar Cutter's wife was Mary. That was his second wife. Mary, his first wife died of some disease. He married his first cousin, Mary Cutter. Okay? Probably not a lot of women around these days. Okay? So he had to, that's what was available. So anyway, there's an article that says Mary Cutter is in negotiation or had negotiations with, and it named the insurance company, I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't one of the Masonic insurance companies. It sounds like Oscar had a big policy. It was so big that it would have broke the insurance company. Mary had to settle for 50% of the face value of the policy.
Oh, boy. Wow.
Yeah. Not only were we underinsured in the buildings, we were underinsured in our lives. Yeah. Anything else?
That's amazing.
Good job, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, you could.
This will be, hopefully we'll get this put into the paper. And,
I was gonna ask, when's the book come out?
yeah. The next thing, again, my basement is full of historical documents from the lodge. I need to get those put together so that we have a real history. And so that's my next job. And June can help me get it published. That you can do. Okay. Thank you all for coming. I do appreciate you all.
Thank you for
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon. Did I have you okay? The little